For several years, I worked out in the forests of a country that experienced a large eradication of people in the not incredibly distant past. Several times I found skulls. Once, I wasn't watching where I was going and stumbled on something soft. I looked down, and it looked like a very old sweater had been lying there forever. I poked it with my foot and dug around in the vegetation a bit. Most of the skeleton was gone, but it was clear there were bones inside the sweater. Somehow, that freaked me out more than the skulls. Former Park Service here. Being way the heck out in Alaska, waiting for a float plane to pick me up and my partner up, after a week of slogging through the tundra, and waiting, and running out of food, and eating berries, and then when the plane landed 3 days late, hearing what some horrible people had done to a tower in New York. In geology field camp in Colorado, one day we're out doing a field test, which involves wandering around by yourself, checking out outcrops in an effort to figure out the underlying geological structures in the area, like folds, faults, etc. We're up on top of this cliff, and I'm wandering around near the edge, trying to find a way to look at the horizontal layers that I'm currently standing on top of. I find a small, nearly vertical crevice that looks like it will do the trick, and I can see a little ledge about 8 feet down that looks like I can scramble down to it and get a good picture of what's going on. So I shimmy my way down without too much problem, and jump down to the ledge, landing in a mass of juniper needles and hard, white things, which turned out to be lots and lots of elk, deer, and bighorn sheep bones, and lots of shedding, tawny fur, and the pervasive odor of cat droppings. Needless to say, I scrambled the heck out of there as fast as my monkey arms would take me, and counted myself lucky that no one was home. Long story short, I climbed into an active mountain lion den, and then got out as fast as possible. My pops and I are avid campers. Not professionals anymore, but my dad used to be a wilderness guide for kids. We typically prefer the eastern western Sierras as they have great car camping spots next to lakes and a lot of great trails. Last summer, we decided to go up for a 2-night stay and do some day hiking. The campground is pretty full. Not unusual for the summer, but we are lucky enough, I thought at the time, to find a pretty secluded site, and we set up our tents. The first night is normal, a little bear activity, but we're used to that. Second night, I crawl into my backpacking tent, head and toes hit both ends, very small, and I pass out cold, until about 3 a.m., when I wake up to the sound of footsteps. My dad is a diabetic and needs to get up to relieve himself around 3 or 4 times a night, and the sounds are definitely footsteps, but they're coming from the wrong direction. We were located next to the bathrooms, so the footsteps should be moving in that direction, but they're coming closer to my tent. They stop about a yard short, and the breathing gets really heavy. I first brush it off as my dad may be lost without a flashlight. The breathing goes away. I fall back asleep only to be awoken a few minutes later to breathing right above the tent. You know that rush of terror up your spine? I had that. This wasn't my dad. I lay perfectly still, but the footsteps continued to circle the tent. I had the rainfly on, so I couldn't see through the roof, and it was a new moon and pitch black. Now, I convinced myself, a heavy sleeper, that I'm just dreaming. Just as that thought runs through my head, I feel a single finger run the length of my foot through the tent, real slow and methodical. Now I figure I have to be dreaming, because my foot is in my sleeping bag and I couldn't possibly feel that. But that comfort disappears quickly when I realize, using the small ambient light available, that my foot was bare and out of the bag. I lay frozen as, whatever it was, strokes my foot for a minute or two, gives a few more labored breaths, and then just stands above my tent for what felt like an eternity before disappearing. I stayed up all night. In the morning, I heard my dad get out of his tent. I bolted up and met him by the fire. He looked me in the eye and asked if I had gotten up the night before. I asked him the same, and he said he had around 2 a.m. because he thought someone was going through our stuff. As I told him my story, we noticed our gear had been neatly rearranged on the table. Every item, nothing taken. Footsteps in a perfect circle around my tent. We still can't even talk about it without getting skeeved out. I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon and from the position I was in. I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I laid there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As I got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveyed our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He'd stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned, sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there, staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then, he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. I was working with an endangered shorebirds one summer and living on a remote island off of Cape Cod. One 12-hour day of monitoring. I plopped down in some sand to take a nap and noticed a bottle laying next to my head. It was fogged up and weathered from the sea. I usually don't think much of bottles because they're everywhere on the island, but I decided to open it, thinking there might be something inside of it. Earlier that summer, I found a message in a bottle from a team of people researching local currents, asking me to email them the coordinates I found it at. Sure enough, this one had a message in it. I pulled out a wet, folded piece of paper from the bottle and carefully unfolded it. It immediately began to tear apart in the wind, but I kept it pieced together just well enough to read it. It was from a woman named Mama Lou. She addressed it to the universe, asking to become cancer-free, and hoping for a sign of remission during her doctor's appointment that was scheduled 2 days after she wrote the letter. It was one of the saddest and most beautiful things I've ever read. A letter to the universe, and a glimpse into the soul of a person who is desperate to grasp on to life as she knows it, sitting in my unlikely hands.